must have lived in a hydraulic cushion.
Get
See
your,
buddy.
yeah, there he goes. Great.
Good job, buddy. Good net job. Beautiful fish, unbelievable.
Was that the high vis?
Yeah, but I had to end up dropping down one size.
Well, Kelly, I noticed that fly is a little bit different than the first one that you used. It's got looks like a different design or size at least.
It's both. It's a little different. We dropped, when that fish didn't take that 18, generally, you know, if you step down a size, that's one of the first things you want to think about. But the other thing is that when we picked up that natural, it had a crumpled tail. They weren't splayed out like the traditional tails are on our ties. And so the first one I put over was an 18 with a traditional split tail. And this one is a 20. I went down one size, basically the same fly, but instead of having a pair of tails, it's got the same as the wing material. It's high vis, and they're kind of crumpled. They're just kind of a cluster of tails in there. And especially in the fall, for whatever reason, maybe it's the air temperature or whatever, you frequently notice that the tails aren't splayed out, and they're all kind of just a little glob at the end. And as soon as we switched over to that, bingo, took it.
Can't argue with success.
Okay.
Well, I'm just noticing right behind us is another fish rising.
Yeah,
Let's
this
see
is a tough spot, isn't it? We haven't moved.
We landed the
20 feet.
fish right there.
Yeah, that's incredible.
How do you characterize your flies that are in the book? Are they flat water flies, still water flies, Spring Creek flies?
I guess it would be kind of a Stillwater, Spring Creek, but I think they're more just for technical fish. You know, fish that have not fish that are going to take just anything. Fish that have been worked over a lot and
Pressure flies.
Pressure flies, yeah. They're flies that aren't necessarily the easiest flies to see, the easiest to fish. They're pretty. Some of them, a couple of them are different, but aren't easily seen. But they're designed for Spring Creek fishing. You know, in Michigan we have a lot of Spring Creeks also, but they're a little bigger. But the same gentle flows and micro currents and things that make it really difficult to fish.
You fished here in the West a lot, and a lot of your patterns were designed out here on the Bighorn.
I discovered that basically a trout is a trout, and you know, even if it's Michigan or Montana, it doesn't really matter. If the fish has been pressured, you've got to have a pretty exacting fly. And you know, especially in a Spring Creek situation, flat water situations like that, where the fish is going to get a really good look at your fly, then it takes a little bit more in design, and that's what this whole book was, you know.
Well, Kelly, I know that your flies aren't technically hard to tie, but they got to be tied exacting. In other words, the proportions have got to be right. They've got to be able to lie in the water right. And I know that you're going to show us that in the video, and we're really looking forward to getting started. I know we're out here fishing today. In a few minutes we're going to go back to my cabin, and you're going to show us how to tie these flies.
Well, Jack, you're exactly right. They aren't exact, or they're not technically difficult flies to tie, but they are exacting flies. And I'm a real big believer in having a fly that's, you know, simple, because I think they hold up better and there's less likelihood of the fly being deviated on the water surface. If you got too many steps, too many things that can go wrong, I just think it's a lot better off if it's simple.
You use the KISS method?
The KISS
Keep
method.
it simple, stupid.
Exactly. But as far as getting back and tying those flies, those fish just keep feeding.
I know. Now this is a pattern that's in your book?
Yeah, this is one of Dave Ellis's patterns. It's a variation of the old comparadon. It just simply uses Well, we're sitting in Jack Dennis's cabin. We're going to tie some of the flies out of the book. The first one we're going to tie is kind of the signature fly from the book. It's the Galloup's cripple. This fly was designed to show the radius of the natural and to show a single wing, like we were talking about on the river. This is a fly that shows as close as we can get it to the natural spinner, the body shape and the body wing for a single wing fly. And we sell the flies, Umpqua sells the flies and the hooks, but if you don't tie, or if you don't buy the hooks already, I want to show you how to bend the hook yourself, because not everybody uses you know, one style of hook or the other. But this is important on how we do this, because when you're bending the hooks, it's critical not to put a tight bend into it, because otherwise the hook will break. And how you can do that, at least the way I found is the easiest, is to take the hook in a vise, not in a pair of pliers, because when you take pliers and you get them really tight, you have a tendency to make a tight bend on the hook. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the vise up so that it's twice as wide at least as the hook shank. And so that way I don't get any tight edges. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right in the back third, and I'm going to bend it just a little bit, and then I'm going to come forward and I'm going to bend it again. And I'm going to look at it. I didn't get quite enough, so I'm going to take just a little bit more. And I like to do this in steps 2 or 3. And then I'm going to get the curve to the hook. Not sure if I got that in focus, but it's a nice even radius. If you don't think you got as much as you want, just go in a little tighter and go do it in the middle, and you should get a nice clean radius to the hook that's equal to the type of insect that you're going to be emulating. And it's, you know, you can go out and just pick up a few of them and you can just diagram it. I talk in the book about doing silhouettes for the shape of the fly. And if you go out and grab a few of them on the stream and just take a pencil sketch on anything, a piece of cardboard, anything that just lets you see the natural, then you can bend the hooks exactly how you want to. So this particular one we're going to do is a blue wing olive, but it's going to be tied a little bit bigger than normal. It'd be more like a Hendrickson size for an Eastern Hendrickson. And we're going to do that through the entire video. We're going to tie most of the flies just slightly bigger than maybe you would normally. You know, mostly so we can see them a little clearer while we're shooting them. But the tying steps are identical from size 12 to size 20. So what we're going to start with is we're going to start the thread approximately where I want the wing to start. Just giving myself a guidance so that where I'm going to put the wing, and that's going to be roughly 2/3 of the way up on the hook shank. We're going to take a hackle off the side of the neck, you know, in the upper middle here, off the side of the neck. These hackles tend to be a little bit longer, the barbulars do, and they also, they're the bigger portions of the neck, they're the bigger hackle. You don't usually use them for much else. And what I like to do, it's not a real critical element to the fly, but it just makes it look nice. I take the bend or the natural curve to the tail feathers off of this. So if it's curved to the left, I want to continue that curve. So I generally take these off if you're looking at the shiny side of the hackle, it'll be the right side when you're looking at it, holding it in your hand. But again, it's not all that critical. And then you're going to use your hook as a gauge. That's really critical in all dry flies. You have to have something so that your tails are the same length consistently. Put the tail up against the shank of the hook to measure the length, because the tails are generally the length of the body. And so I just put that up there, switch hands, do a single secure wrap to check it. And at this point, make sure that everything's right. People have a tendency when they're tying to lock in right now and then not want to move anything. But if it's not quite right, you've got a wrap or two around the hook, and then you can say, okay, I want it to move a little bit left, a little bit right. This looks just fine. And then just simply tighten down that thread just a little bit, and it'll lock right in. For this particular fly, you can use any type of dubbing you want. I like to use the superfines, but I also like to blend my dubbing myself a little bit. I want an olive brown, but I don't want a real dark olive brown. I just want one that shows a little bit of variegation into the body, because they're really not, I'm not going to rib this fly. Most of the abdomen's got a segmentation, and all of them do. and I want it to look a little bit mottled in there. I don't want it to be real consistent. So, and I do that with most of my flies, and I simply take 2/3 olive and then a third of brown, and I just do a couple folds, just a couple quick folds, and I don't necessarily try to get it blended really well. I just try to get it so that it's just enough to, when it goes through, it's inconsistent. I don't use dubbing wax on my threads, and I don't use pre-waxed threads. And when you're dubbing a hook, I like to start, you want to build a taper so that it's consistent, you know, consistent from the back to the forward. It's getting thin and then thicker towards the thorax. And I'll put a really fine amount of dubbing on it there and then slide it forward to start that. And I'll show you a little trick about dubbing here. I would say that the #1 error done in tying dry flies with dubbing is to put too much dubbing on the thread. The key to dubbing effectively is to have as little as you can, as tightly as you can around the thread. The tighter the dubbing is, the less likely, this is all, most all dubbings today are pre-treated so they don't take in water. But if you lose a lot of dubbing, it's going to weave, the water will soak in between the fibers. It won't be soaking into the fibers, but it's going to make the fly heavier. So the tighter you make that, the less likely the water is to absorb between the fibers. And a easy rule of thumb, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this because it's pretty fine, but if you let it go, if you let dubbing go and it floats, it's just right. That one's just floating away here, and if you, just an easy example, if you have too much and you let it go, it drops right to the table. A good rule of thumb is if it floats in the air, if you let it go, and this one just took off on me, it's floating right here, if it appears to defy gravity, you've got just enough. On the other hand, if you have too much and you let it go, it's going to sink right to the table. Okay. So here I'm just going to continue dubbing. Occasionally when I'm dubbing, I'll wet my finger just a little bit just to get it so it sticks around the thread. But you always go the same direction with your dubbing. Tight, small amounts. The tighter you make it, again, the better the fly is going to resist taking water in. And I'm going to make this consistently just a little bit thicker as I go up and down the thread, from the thinnest point being closest to the hook where I'm going to start to the thickest point being up where I'm going to wrap forward and into the abdomen. And you'll see when I wrap this, it's not going to be a consistent color. And I think that's pretty critical. And so we're going to just wrap this, start here, I'm going to wrap forward, and I'm going to go right over, notice I didn't cut those hackle fibers off, I'm going to leave them right in there, just so everything's even more secure. I'm going to wrap back over it. I'm not going to try to build this body really thick with, by building the hackle thick. I'd rather go over top of it once or twice so that dubbing retains its real dense fiber, you know, around the thread instead of being loose, because the looser that is, the more likely it's going to be to, you know, you catch a couple fish on it, it's going to get even more picked out. And again, I've got a pretty inconsistent body color here, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. And I'm pretty close right there to where I want to be, where I want to start this, putting the wing in. I'm going to advance it just a little bit more. So I'm actually going to tie the wing onto part of this dubbing, not onto a bare shank of the hook. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add the wing. For this particular fly, I like to use a crinkly Zelon. You can get straight Zelon or crinkly Zelon. You can use a lot of different wing materials. It's just the one I like to use for this particular fly. And what I'm going to do is, you have to kind of decide the size wing you want for each of your flies, and it might not necessarily be a single strand that you pull off of there. I'm going to take just 10% or so of this one strand out, and I'm going to look at it, And if you stretch it tight and let it spring back, you'll see how thick it's actually going to be in comparison to the wing. Stretch it out and then you let it decompress.